Ever watch a video of a screaming robot with a human-like face? Does it make you feel creeped out or uncomfortable? What if there's a reason for that? What if humans evolved this fear of the uncanny things that look like us because we were at one point hunted by things that pretended to be us? After all, there are insects that look like other insects just to eat them. It's a scary thought, to be sure. Now enjoy these stories of humanoid creature sightings, because when things look just barely familiar, that makes it even more terrifying. Also, I want to narrate your stories. Send them over to me at darkstories.org. And be sure to subscribe and review my podcasts on iTunes or go to eeriecast.com. By the way, we have 5 half-hour episodes of Freaky Folklore out right now, which you can listen to on eeriecast.com or your favorite podcast service. Let me know in the comments if you want a marathon of those episodes in one big video here. Thank you. Now, let's begin. The Khancoban Creature, from Thaddeus. This event occurred in Khancoban, a small town at the foot of the tallest mountains on the Australian continent. The town is comprised of a few tightly nestled streets surrounded on 3 sides by the rugged wilderness of the Kosciuszko National Park. Even from a map, the town looks like a couple of suburban blocks that have been sliced off a city and placed on the edge of the Alps. The Kosciuszko National Park is an immense area. It is genuine wilderness filled with deep ravines, snowy peaks, and ancient dark forests. This is an event and a date that has been seared into my brain as if by a branding iron. It is something I can't forget, as much as I may want to. Twilight was arriving a little early that day. It was the 22nd of May 2003. The sky was thick with low autumn clouds that dropped light drizzles on and off. I had decided to take my dog for a walk somewhere different, much further than usual. It was going to be a long, cold night, and I wanted to wear her out so she wouldn't wake me too early in the next morning. I didn't have to get up for work, and I wanted to make the most of this rare luxury. Previously, I'd noticed a track leading off into the bush a block away from my cottage. I'd never been up that way before. With the weather cooling down, there was little risk of the dog getting ticks, so I decided that this was the day to explore. We left on the road and started making our way up the track through a sea of bracken. We continued on until the path disappeared from view into tall eucalypts. My dog went ahead as usual, sniffing and pulling on her lead. Then she abruptly stopped. I could actually see the fur standing up on the nape of her rust-colored neck. She began a very slow and deep growl. I'd never quite seen her react this way before. I became aware of a chill inside, not from the cold, but something I couldn't put my finger on. It was inside, deep inside. I felt deeply afraid, but tried to reason with myself and shrug it off. I looked around to see what could possibly be making the dog and I feel so unnerved. Where we stood, the gargantuan gums above us were letting in just enough light to allow bracken and grasses to cover the ground. I couldn't see anything out of place, but the feeling was there. I also noticed a smell. It was faint but acrid, reminiscent of burning fuses. The surface of the track was dry soil covered in a thin layer of moisture from the day's occasional light drizzle. It hadn't been enough rain to really wet anything through, just to coat leaves and soil with a dew-like misting of water. This made it easy to see the tracks I now noticed on the path ahead. The soil had been disturbed. Obviously, an animal had been there not long ago. I couldn't distinguish any recognizable prints. Animals like wombats and wallabies tend to leave recognizable footprints as they travel across or along the forest tracks. It looked like whatever had been there was moving back and forth on the same spot, or maybe there had been a scuffle between 2 animals. The dog's lead jerked my arm hard. She had stopped growling and was now pulling hard in the direction we'd just come from. I could hear her yelping above a new sound, a gurgling sound. I suddenly saw the bracken moving to the left of us. Out from behind the base of the nearest tree appeared something small but genuinely horrendous. The shadows were deep and undefined, but I could still see it clearly. I had no idea what I was looking at, but I will never forget it. A small being crouched before me. It was around the size of a 2-year-old child. The skin was a mottled gray, and it was hairless. There were rough patches like it was beginning to peel from sunburn. The skin also glistened like it was slightly wet. It was crouched on the ground as if it was about to launch itself at me. I'm not sure how long I stood there, frozen in fear. The head had no ears or anything resembling a nose. A small lipless mouth was wide open, emitting the gurgling sound I heard earlier. Inside were multiple sets of jagged gray teeth, and small amounts of frothed saliva shot out on its breath. The toes of its hunched back legs were long and moving in an angry way, like long, agitated fingers. It had 2 small limbs at the front. I guess you could say they were arms. They stretched out motionless, unmoving, long, claw-like digits stuck out at the end of the sickly, thin limbs. The eyes were beyond fearful. They weren't in proportion to the size of its featureless head. Not in proportion for anything I've seen on this planet. They were large and dark gray. Elongated black pupils ran from top to bottom. I noticed with horror that they suddenly enlarged as the gurgling changed pitch. I became overwhelmed with an intense wave of nausea and terror. I noticed the dog was gone as I stumbled backward and fell onto the long grass. I didn't look back. There was a ringing in my ears that could have been me or the hideous being behind me. I couldn't tell, and I didn't care. I got up and ran without looking back. I ran into town as fast as I could. I needed to be near people. Anyone. Just near other humans. I struggled to regain my breath in the post office, the only business still open. I talked to a friend who was working behind the counter. She asked if I was okay as she looked at the dirt on my clothes and my obvious breathlessness. I told her my dog had run off and I'd been looking for her. I quickly changed the subject to her dog, which was beside her, nestled in a beanbag by the heater. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what had just happened. I still haven't. I found my dog waiting for me when I eventually arrived home. She was obviously very shaken up too. All these years later, I still haven't gained the courage to walk that track again. I've never told anyone in Khancoban of my encounter. It's a small town with a fast grapevine, as in all small towns. I suspect most residents would think me crazier than they already do, so I've kept this to myself until now. I just hope that no one else has to experience what I did that gloomy afternoon back in May 2003. It Followed Me Home, from Mason B. This all began a few weeks ago as of writing this. My friend and I had gone up to a park near my house to play some basketball. While we played, I noticed something. In a dark corner of the park, there was a figure of a man. The figure was far too tall to be a man, around 8 feet. I leaned over to my friend and asked if he saw it too. He confirmed what I was hoping was just me seeing things. We decided to call it a night and go home. As we walked, we'd have to pass the corner the thing was standing in. When we made it to the corner, it was gone. We couldn't see, hear, or smell anything. My friend lived closer to the park than me, so I walked him home, then had about 10 minutes of walking to get home. I was a little over halfway home myself when I had my second encounter with this thing. I had just walked over a patch of ice and was back on the sidewalk. Behind me, I could hear footsteps. I could tell they were footsteps from how the ice was cracking. Then I could smell sulfur, which smells like rotten eggs if you've never smelt it before. Suddenly, my fight-or-flight instinct kicked in. I sprinted all the way home to the safety of my family. Nothing happened for a couple of days, but then I was trying to fall asleep, and I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was my mom or dad going to bed, but then I remembered that they had gone to bed early, so it couldn't be them. Then I heard the panel to the attic slide open, and a couple of seconds later, it slid shut. I've heard footsteps in the attic above my room. One night I saw bright yellow eyes watching me from my closet. One night I woke up early to go to a workout for the football team. My backpack was on the table with a couple of inches of space between the edge of the table so it wouldn't tip over, and was cooking some breakfast. My backpack slid to the edge of the table and fell over behind me, which startled me. When I went to pick it up, it had turned 90 degrees when it fell. This event has happened a couple of times over the past couple of days. Yesterday, when I was in the shower, my music kept pausing for no reason. I decided to peek over the shower curtain to try and see why, but I regret doing that. I saw the same thing I saw a couple of weeks ago when I was playing basketball with my friend. It was hunched over to fit in the small bathroom, but it was definitely the same thing. I was hit with that sulfur smell. I decided to open the curtain and get out of the bathroom, but it was gone when I opened the curtain. I haven't seen it in the past 24 hours. This is the only time I've talked about what I've seen and heard. What was that thing on my wall? From Hinata03. My sister and I are extremely close. One night, we had decided to stay up a little late and build a fort in my room and watch some movies. I put on a Disney movie for my sister and I. We got comfy and started to watch. About 15 minutes go by and we hear something fall on the floor. I then pause the movie and go out of the room, and I see that one of my dresses was on the floor. I looked around to see if one of my cats was in the room, but they weren't. So I then assumed that maybe the wind had blown it onto the floor. I was trying to think of something that would make sense. After I go back into the fort with my little sister, I then proceed to play the movie for us. Another 20 minutes go by and I leave the fort. This time I see two of my dresses were on the floor. I checked my window and my window was shut, so it wasn't the wind, and I knew my cats weren't in my room. So what could have knocked them down? Once again I go back into the fort with my little sister. That's when we start to hear whispering. My sister grabs the remote and pauses the movie, and I raise a finger to tell her to be quiet. She nods. My sister and I continue to hear whispering, and we're both wondering if it's my parents. But it wasn't. Obviously, the two of us know what our parents' voices sound like. This was a voice we had never heard before. My sister looked at me with confusion on her face, and she pointed to where my dresses were. I shook my head no, but she insists as she nods her head at me. So I decide to take the chance. I slowly pull open the left side of the fort, and my sister, who is right beside me, was holding my hand. As we're pulling the side blanket away, we can see what's going on. We see my dresses moving from one end to the other of my rack very slowly. We then see what looks like a white finger that is on my wall. The figure or creature was on my wall sitting like a frog. Its legs were under its body and its hand was under its chest. My sister and I are looking at these things in shock and horror, and then it turns its head all the way around, and it's looking right at me and my sister. I swear, we'll never forget what the creature's face looked like. Its eyes were black. I mean pure black. It then turns around the other way and the dresses go back to where they were on the other side. After that, my sister and I let go of a breath we didn't know we were holding. I waited a couple of minutes and I rushed out of the fort, and I turned the light on in my room. The two of us then proceeded to go slowly to where we saw that creature. In a very quick motion, I moved my dresses and nothing was there except what appeared to be 2 handprints and footprints. We still, to this day, don't know what was in my room that night, but we do know one thing, and that is we will never forget what it looked like. My Small Town Nightmare, from Broday 6. In September of 2020, I moved 5 hours away from the only home I've ever known, into a small country town in the north corner of Louisiana. This happened in January of 2021, and it has changed the way I look at nature. This winter I stayed at my cousin's house and we had a guys' night, doing just what teenage boys like to do when we're unsupervised. It was me, my cousin T, my other cousins S and K, and my girlfriend at the time. She was the only girl we allowed to hang out with us because she was just one of the guys. We stayed up late, playing the latest games on our phones and board games we found in the closet, when suddenly T popped a question into our heads. Hey, what if we sneak out and explore that mill down the road? I thought about it for a second, considering all the things that could go wrong. But we were all bored and looking for some adventure. After the parents went to sleep, we all piled into S's car and drove a couple miles down the road. The mill was an old sketchy warehouse used way back in the 50s for old cars and car parts. We called it the mill because it had a massive water wheel on the side that did God knows what. Everybody says it was haunted and stalked by the dead workers that died on the job, but we didn't believe that stuff. We pulled up, freezing our tails off because it was 20 degrees outside. Me, being the oldest out of all of us, got out and walked up to the front corridor, pushing the doors open. We all turn on our lights and make our way inside. The layout of the building had the main room that we were in that led to 2 different hallways on either side of the room, one leading to a giant garage and the other leading to small office rooms. So we decided to make our way towards the garage first. I opened the door and tried the light switch, but of course it doesn't work. I turned around to see if they were behind me, and as soon as I did, I heard a piece of metal hit the ground in the far corner. I stopped dead in my tracks, as did the rest of us, and slowly turned my head towards where the noise came from. I shone my light around and found nothing but a metal pipe lying on the ground, still rolling slowly. I figured it was knocked over whenever we opened the door. We looked around and found nothing of interest, so we decided to walk down the other hallway. All of us were severely anxious, but so curious that we had to know what the rest of the building was like. S and K went in the first room as me, T, and my girlfriend walked to the second room. We get inside and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It was horrendous, like a skunk had eaten some pot and exploded everywhere. I know that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it was absolutely horrible. I walked over to one of the closet areas in the room, and I find the source of the smell, with T gagging behind me. It was a dead deer. Its head was missing, and its innards were everywhere, not just on the ground, but all over the walls and ceiling of the closet. I freeze as I hear T start whimpering. What is that? I turn to my left ever so slightly, and I see the outline of a 5-foot man standing there baring his teeth. I quickly shine my light on him and wish I never had. He had no lips. All I could see were sharp, serrated teeth glistening in the light. His eyes, they bore an amber tint, reflecting back at me, and his nose, well, he didn't have one, except for 2 holes in his face. I started to whimper and shake uncontrollably when my girlfriend screamed at the top of her lungs, and this thing lunged at me. I felt a sharp pain in my right calf as I looked down to see a sharp claw sticking out the other side. That's when I felt a wave of anger rush over me, and I kicked at whatever the heck this thing was, right in the face. I picked up my girlfriend and pushed T out the door. I went for S and K, and they rushed out and started running down the hall. I was in full-on protective mode while my leg dripped with blood. I heard whatever this thing was beginning to scramble in the room, and it hit the wall hard. I told everyone to move faster, and soon we were out of the building and in S's car. He quickly locked the doors and cranked it up, and as the headlights turned on, we all got a good look at what it was. It wasn't 5 feet tall. It must have been crouched down in the room because outside, this thing was 9 feet tall at least. It stretched out its long arms, and at the ends were hands with knives for fingers. S puts his car in reverse and speeds out of the lot, kicking up rocks everywhere. We get back on the main road, and behind us, this thing was keeping pace, so not thinking, I told S to brake check it, and we soon feel the whiplash. It felt like an elephant running into the back of us. S quickly floors it, and we get back to my house okay. Of course, I had to tell my parents I was gushing blood, and I had to go to the hospital, getting 28 stitches. But besides that, we were all okay. A little shaken up, but otherwise fine. When my dad asked what could have happened, I lied and said there was a crazy maniac at the mill. I know we were caught, so there was no point in lying exactly. But I did lie a little bit, because no one was going to believe that we saw a Slender Man-type figure or whatever that thing was. We were all then grounded, but at least we escaped with our lives, and we didn't end up like that poor deer. Anyway, that's my story. It was a horrifying experience that really changed the way I view nature, and that even though we think we know everything, we haven't even scratched the surface. Humanoid freaks crawling on all fours. From Lilo, 5150. I'm 30 years old, and I've spent a lot of time outdoors and in the woods, never seeing anything I couldn't explain. But on this particular cold winter night, my life changed forever. Now, I don't live deep in the woods. A small town, sure, but my home is considered in the city. Where I live is on the edge of town, so there are streetlights, but not enough well-lit areas to cover the stars from shining bright in the sky. It was shortly after darkness had taken completely over the day when a girlfriend of mine and I were leaving my house. We use the back door at my house, so as you step out you can see a row of hedges and the backside of a neighbor's house. I walk swiftly out the back door, and as plain as day I could hear and see someone in the hedges. I immediately say to my friend, "My God, there's somebody in the freaking bushes." I continue to keep my eyes locked on the bushes, walking to my car, trying to see what might emerge from the bushes. I get in my car and cut the headlights on and flip them to bright. At that very second, I see what I thought was a man at the time, except something was very wrong with his appearance. This thing I see has skin as pale white as I've ever seen, almost gray. It's not wearing a shirt because I could clearly see its head and chest, and it's so cold out, it's completely bald-headed from what I could tell, and it's crawling around on all fours, very low to the ground. It's very fast. It crawls with almost spider-like movement. I see it run from behind the hedges to behind my metal outbuilding in the back corner of my yard. I completely came unglued at what I'd just seen. So many thoughts ran through my head, I tried to rationalize what I saw. I say to my friend, "Did you freaking see that?" And she said no. She had been opening the passenger side door and getting into the car as I saw it make its move. I tell her to make sure the door is locked because there's someone or something behind the building back there. She turned pale when I told her that. Then she asked, "So, you saw what you heard in the bushes?" I answer yes, but I don't know what it was. I explained to her what I saw. I sit a while longer with the lights shining on the backyard, but I don't see any movement. So I start to back down the driveway when I see a tiny bit of movement coming from the hedges where the commotion began, where the last glimmer of light shines in that direction. I see a small portion of another pale face as I'd just seen the thing crawling on all fours. It's peering through the hedges at the very bottom, close to the ground, being completely still. There were two of them. I blurt out, "It's not human. Those things aren't human." I was almost inconsolable the rest of the night, and for the days to follow, and every time I'd think about this humanoid freak, I'd get terrible anxiety. There are things on this earth that are otherworldly, and that can't be explained. I'm simply disgusted at what I saw, and hope I never see anything like that again. Don't ever let your guard down while outside. You are not alone, even if you're the only person around. It stalked my grandpa and I. From Travis the fisherman. On an early morning, my grandpa and I went on a half-hour hike on a road that moose tend to use, but on our hike, the woods went silent. I told my grandpa and he said, "It's fine. It's probably a bear looking for some moose." I said okay, but I felt as if I was being watched from the tree line just off the road. Later, we stopped at our spot where we planned to sit for a bit, and my grandpa told me that there used to be a type of trout that was put in the lake to get rid of the perch, but they died because they couldn't reproduce for some reason, and the perch population began to grow again. When we started to head back, we both heard the grunt of a moose mixed with a bear growl. It was distorted. We started to speed walk back, and I put on some music, hoping it would scare the bear off. The rest of the hike was uneventful, but later that day as I went to bed, I saw this tall, pale, and frail man with pointed ears and a mouth full of yellowish red teeth, pressing himself against the window. I remember screaming when I saw it. My grandparents came rushing in the room while I'm crying in fear. My grandpa grabbed his .30-06 rifle, and he handed me his 12-gauge shotgun. We burst outside with Grandma holding a two-handed flashlight while we shot this creature round after round until we got it to run off. I don't think we actually heard it. Was it a Wendigo or Skinwalker? I've never seen it again, but if I do, I'll be prepared.